In the heart of the fifth sphere of Twain, the Decadia district, two teenage girls were relaxing in the bottom of their open-top boat, watching the seagulls fly overhead. Jean and Clara, twins, laid with their feet at opposite ends of the tiny rowboat and their heads side by side. Neither had spoken for over 20 minutes when Clara's data slate necklace rang. Clara touched it, and a pink and red holographic girl appeared over the two. Clara laughed. "Tabitha, what's up?" The floating red and pink AI danced around a bit, cartwheeling. "I had an idea," she said. Clara rose up on her elbows. "Yeah, another prank war with your brother?" Tabitha crossed her eyes and spun in a circle. "Nope, that war is still ongoing. No, this is way better." Jean reached a hand out and flicked water through the hologram. "Spit it out, girl." Tabitha changed into a bird and flew around the boat, landing on the railing. "I found the place." Clara and Jean shared a look, and then turned back at the holographic bird. Tabitha changed into a cherub, fluttering her wings. "At the border near the Kawaru, Kratok, and Lantillion factory districts is a legal void. Lots of pipeworks, rooms and stuff, but no one claims it because it would ruin claims on a truly vital bit of habitat. Your dad lost claim to it years ago when he sold the area to the consortium." Clara put her back against the hull. "Sounds dangerous. I think you should keep looking." Tabitha shook her head and turned into a cat. She started purring and walking the rail. "The place isn't that bad. Lots of room, power, atmosphere, and deep in the station. No one goes there. No cameras. I've had 2 of my crawlers stationed there watching this whole week. No one's been in or out." Jean smiled at Clara. "Mom's over at Sparrow for a decacycle. It might be doable." Clara shook her head. "No. I want a party just as much as you two, but an abandoned industrial hab sounds way too sketchy." Tabitha hopped into the boat as a hyena, laughing. "Too late. Invites are out. Party at the Gabellum tonight. I rolled through your friends lists, and their friends lists, and theirs, and theirs, and theirs. Party." Jean laughed. "Sounds like we got a party to get ready for, sis." Clara shut her eyes and sighed. "I'm taking my breather just in case, and so should you." Jean looked at Tabitha. "You got a line on any spikes?" Tabitha flickered into the bow, reclining as a glowing red man with sunglasses. Tabitha pulled them down a bit. "Girl, I got the hookup. My parties are dope." Tabitha flickered again into her pink and red girl form, tightrope walking the rail. "My brother is going to DJ. We got all our crawlers heading down there to set up. Hope to see you two there." Clara shook her head as the AI vanished. She looked across at her sister. "Guess we should row back and start getting ready." Jean grabbed her oar and lifted Clara's over to her. "Think she'll invite Brandon?" "Yeah, he's on both of our friends lists. I'm sure she did, but she's probably listening still, so if she didn't, I bet she did now," Clara said as she started rowing. Jean shivered and screamed out over the lake. She turned and looked at her sister. "Balls! I'm excited. This is going to be fun." Clara headbutted her shoulder. "Keep rowing, dumbass." Jean glared at her. Clara broke a smile. "I'm excited too." Clara and Jean took a vacuum pod across the 3 spheres over to stockyards. The 2 girls walked through the masses of working peoples and crossed over into the Kawaru district. They stood twice as tall as everyone in the concourse. The small, feathered creatures with their tiny, plump hands darted out of their way. One small one stopped, mesmerized by Clara's shimmering blue dress. "Beautiful," it clucked at her. Clara knelt down, looking it in its black, beady eyes. "I think you're beautiful too. Can I pet you?" The Kawaru youngling looked at her, then back at its mother and siblings. The mother nodded, clucking at it. The youngling looked up at the giant human. "Can I touch your outer covers?" Clara nodded. The youngling stroked its head on her blue dress, and Clara petted it. "You're soft," she said. After a moment of petting, Clara stood up. "Thank you for letting me pet you. If you're ever in Decadia, stop by, say hi." Clara threw over contact info to the mother and started after Jean to catch up. Jean laughed. What was that? They're cute. If they weren't sapient, I'd keep one. Jean giggled and looked at her wrist slate. Access tunnel should be up here. She looked and pointed. I think this building here. She waved her sister to follow and ducked into the shop. Green roots and branches wove through the ceiling, walls and floors. A Kawaru female with 3 long head feathers clucked at them. Strangers? Strangers. What are you in my shop for? You don't eat our feed. Why are you here? Clara approached the counter. I'm sorry. She looked around at the aisles of food and odd items. I was following our map and it said there is a tunnel around here. You ever heard of the Gabellum? The clerk looked over the humans and then back at Clara's eyes. I know where it is. Why do you want to go there? That is a silly place for anyone to go. Clara flicked over 5 credits to the clerk. The clerk looked over the amount and then back at her. What is that for? You're buying something? Is the entrance around here? Clara asked. You really want to go in then? Yes, it is around here. Back of my store is an access hatch. In waste room. It is silly to want to go down there. Why you humans want there? Clara looked over at Jean and Jean walked over. Jean flicked the clerk 5 credits as well. We are going to use your entry hatch. You may get lots more peoples coming through. Feel free to charge them 5. She looked at Clara and then back at the clerk. Yeah, charge everyone 5 credits who comes through. Make yourself some profit. Just direct them to the hatch, okay? The clerk eyed the 2 humans and pattered back and forth on her splayed feet. Is this trouble? I don't want trouble. Clara laughed and started toward the restroom. Jean shook her head. No, shouldn't be. Just a party. The Kawaru shivered her feathers and raised her head plumage. Party, many youth coming. You use my hatch. You take my youth with you. They need to be social, meet other species. What say human girls? Clara stopped in the door to the back hallway. She looked over at Jean. Jean shrugged. Clara smiled at the clerk. More the merrier. Clara then waved Jean to follow. The 2 girls went into the restroom together and found the hatch near the sink. They pushed it open and entered into the ventilation systems. The air was thick and warm in the tunnel. After a few hundred meters, it opened up into a large, expansive cylinder going up and down. Clara stood at the edge looking down the shaft. Red lasers pulsated through the tube, up and past them. A 4-legged robot crawled up the wall of the tube and stopped beside them. Tabitha projected out of several holomitters in front of them. Hello, Clemens girls. You're early, the AI shouted. Clara looked up the shaft. Yeah, we came to help get things set up. Jean leaned in and looked down. This the place? I don't really feel like falling to my death today. Tabitha shifted into her gymnast form and began cartwheeling again. That's the beauty. The whole place is a grav joint. The habitats on the other sides are all downwarding into it. Come on in. You can walk around the whole tube. Clara looked at her and then crouched down. She leaned over the edge and put her hand onto the wall beneath the tunnel lip. Her inner ear changed and she felt the peculiar shift. Her body felt like it should be falling down the tunnel they came in through. Clara looked back in at Jean. Feels legit. Jean laughed and jumped out the tunnel, landing in the Gabellum tube. She rolled as she hit and looked over at Clara. Clara glared at her and she burst out laughing. Clara looked over at Tabitha. All right, let's start getting set up then. Tabitha walked the crawler over to her, projecting herself larger in front of the human. Well, I've got crates of drinks stored down in those empty pipes over there. You could start setting them out for people. Clara nodded and started toward the open piping. She brushed aside a mass of moss and found the boxes of drinks. Whiskey, wine, scotch, and pallets of beer were piled in the back. She walked toward the first and felt chilled. Tabitha, it's freezing in here. I thought you said this place had a stable atmosphere. Tabitha projected herself near the mass of moss. Well, yeah, most of the tube is warm. That piping runs out along the outer hull. All this moss grows here to catch the fog that forms. I guess I could have stored it out here and let it go bad in the warmth. Clara grabbed a box and started over towards a flat area to uncrate it. No, I don't care. She groaned as she sat it down. Jean looked in at the drinks. Damn it. When are some boys going to get here to do this? Clara walked past her and gave her a smack. Quit being lazy and grab some bottles. Tabitha needs our help. Jean groaned. Lame. Within the hour, 5 Craddocks showed up. Their alpha, Profin, quickly set about with his pack and started moving the drinks for the girls. Jean and Clara climbed on a ledge and started directing them. Tabitha appeared next to the girls. My brother is busy at the moment, but he'll be here in about 30 and start the music up, the AI said. Clara shrugged and opened a bag of poppers. She leaned her head back and flicked one into the air, catching it in her mouth and chomping down. Doesn't matter. I'm in relax mode. Tabitha flickered for a moment. The poor little Kawaru is overwhelmed. Lots of people showing up in her store. Jean looked down the tube at the tunnel entrance as 4 more peoples arrived, 2 in Finnegan, a grazer, and an heir. She pointed. Avio, get your ass over here. Avio, a newly arrived heir, transitioned into the gravity well and started walking over to her. You got the spikes? She asked. Avio reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a glowing vial. I have quite a few of them, each species tailored. Did you wish to make a purchase? Of course, you slimy stud you. I want one for me and my sister. He pulled out another glowing vial and handed the 2 over to her. 80 clams. Jean nodded and threw the amount over to him. Done. She handed one over to Clara. Clara looked it over and then looked at Avio. She's been bragging on this stuff. What's going to happen to me? Avio stepped closer to her, his head in front of hers as she sat. You will feel warm. A comfort will fall on your body. Your mind will feel at ease, and your senses will be heightened. John leaned over and laughed at Clara. Brandon and I made out for hours on it. It's amazing. You feel everything so intense. It's amazing. Clara looked down at it, and then up at Avio. Is it addictive? It is less so than your alcohol, but more so than your sugars, he replied. Clara handed it back to Jean. Give mine to Brandon when he gets here. You 2 enjoy it. Jean smiled and hopped off the ledge. Will do. She pranced over toward the tunnel entrance as several more groups entered. Avio left to go associate with the party he entered with. Several Craddock walked over and purchased green glowing vials off of him. Clara shook her head. I'm not a fan of that bit, Tabitha. Tabitha flickered beside her. I am. I wish I could feel half of what you organics do. Tabitha looked over at the tunnel as 2 more human females entered. Speaking of that, you know those girls? Clara looked over at them. They're new. Came downstream on the Harbinger. Some religious families and refugees. They're in my chemistry class. Tabitha smiled, flickering into the form of a large red python. Sure. I want to meet them, she hissed. Tabitha slithered down from the ledge and crossed the tube over to them. Clara watched as the Tabitha changed back into a small girl and started talking to the 2. The 3 of them walked around the tube walls over to the drinks, and each of them poured themselves a glass. From Clara's vantage, they appeared to be standing on the wall, perpendicular to gravity. After a moment, Tabitha pranced back over, and the 2 followed. Tabitha laughed a bit. Clara, I want you to meet Etta. Etta was short, stocky, acne just starting on her face. She approached and extended a hand out to Clara. Hi. Tabitha said you were the 2 hosting the party. My sister and I wanted to thank you for inviting us. Clara shook her hand. No problem. You're in my chemistry class, aren't you? Etta nodded. Yeah. I didn't think you noticed me. We try to keep to ourselves. Clara smiled and looked from her to her taller sister. No need to be shy. Humans need to get to know each other. Clara then extended her hand to the taller sister. Clara Clemens, nice to meet you. She took it and shook. Marion. Clara nodded. Nice to meet you both. You liking the twain so far? Marion looked at her sister for a moment and then met Clara's gaze. Well, I miss home, but it's gone. I guess we're making do, adapting. How's the rest of your family taking it? Have any other siblings? Etta crawled up to the ledge, struggling a bit with her short legs. Eventually, she made it and sat next to Clara. No, it's just us. Thankfully, there's a fund for refugees. It helps. Jean approached with a bottle and handed it to Clara. Clara accepted it. Etta, this is my sister Jean. Etta smiled and lifted her glass towards her. Jean nodded. You guys are in our chemistry class. She pointed at Marion. You sit by Brandon, don't you? Marion sighed. Yeah, he's cute. I lucked out. Jean glared at her. He's mine. Back off, understand? Marion lifted her hands up. I meant nothing. You can have him. Clara rolled her eyes. Jean, they were just telling me how they are refugees here. How our dad's fund has helped them get settled. Jean looked them over. Oh, well, that's good, I guess. You two plan on working or something, or are you going to be fine kids for the foreseeable? Etta leaned over, staring Jean down. I've already got an internship. Going to be working in a research lab over in the Infinigan wards. What about you? You going to work, or are you just going to live off of Daddy's money? Clara cleared her throat. Jean and I do help my dad. Jean works down in the accounting firm, learning the ropes there. I've always been more hands-on, and he lets me work in his ship bay on the weekends. Lots of Infinigan there, too. She looked over at Marion. What about you, Marion? You got anything lined up? Marion shook her head. Not yet. I like ships, though. Your dad have any room for more helpers, you think? Clara nodded. Hell yeah. Especially humans. The Infinigan get to him sometimes, and I don't get down there as much as he would like. I can put in a word for you if you want. Marion smiled. I'd love that. We could use the extra clams, too. At that moment, Tabitha's brother arrived and began broadcasting synth music through the gabellum. Jean's spike started kicking in, and she started writhing to the music. She danced away from the girls. Marion shouted, I see Brandon coming in. Do you think she's really mad at me? Clara shook her head, shouting back, No, she is just reactionary. She'll be mad for a moment, but don't worry. It passes quick. Clara looked and saw Jean making out with Brandon already. I think she's already forgotten about you. Marion watched for a moment, and then caught the eye of one of Brandon's friends. Who's he? She shouted. Clara laughed. Fair game. Lucas Rain. He's really smart, but awkward. Marion smiled and looked at him. I like awkward. She started walking off to introduce herself. Etta leaned in towards Clara. We've really never partied before. I don't really know what to do. Clara pointed her bottle at Marion, who was laughing and talking with Lucas already. She's doing all right. Get out there. Introduce yourself. Etta shook her head. It's too much. Mind if I sit with you here? Clara took a drink and shrugged. Doesn't bother me a bit. The two sat and watched as the tube filled with peoples. Some started lifting others onto their shoulders and into the gravoid that ran down the center of the tube. The masses danced underneath as an Infinigan female curled her arms in and floated down the tube above everyone's heads. Clara laughed and reached a hand out, catching the Infinigan girl's hand, and she pivoted down onto the ledge. Hey, Screech Tongue, Clara said. Hey, I'm loving this party. Tabitha said you and Jean put it together. Clara shrugged. In name only. Screech Tongue bobbed her ears and stretched her forearms out into the air. She writhed back and forth as lasers and music pulsed around her. I love this, she shouted. Clara leaned over to Etta. I think she had one of Avio's spikes. Etta nodded. The two human girls sat on the ledge watching as the numerous species danced, coupled, kissed, sang, and enjoyed themselves in the tunnel. Etta watched Marion as she kissed Lucas. She could almost feel his lips herself. Sam stood in the elevator, Jean on his back with feet through his arms, her head laid on his shoulder. Clara stood beside them, waiting as the lift ascended through the station. "Jean," he said. "How you feeling?" Jean groaned. "I'm not going to puke on you." Clara looked up at her dad. "Thank you for getting us." Sam looked over at her. 7 kids hospitalized. Power out through 3 districts. Don't think you two are getting out of this." The elevator slowed and came to a stop. Sam stepped out onto his floor, Clara following. He walked down the hall to his apartment. He nodded at Clara and she opened the door. He edged through the door, careful to make sure to hit Jean on the doorframe slightly. She groaned with the impact. He went down the hall and kicked a chair out and away from the table, then lowered Jean into it. Sam looked at his 2 girls, Clara standing and staring at him. "Clara, help me with breakfast. I'm going to teach you the family hangover cure." Clara nodded and followed him into the kitchen. The 2 busied themselves working together in near silence. Jean laid with her head and arms on the table, groaning every so often. After a while, the 2 re-emerged with plates heaping with eggs, bacon, and toast. Sam carried in a large pitcher of a reddish liquid. He sat a glass down in front of Jean and poured it full. "Drink up and eat the whole plate," he commanded. Jean raised her head, groaning. "Torture." Sam smiled at his daughter. "Oh, the torture is just starting." He pointed at the plate. "Eat. You got a long day ahead of you." Sam smiled as he ate breakfast. He looked up as John started taking a few bites. "So, Jean," she looked up at him. "Who's the boy?" he asked. Clara eyed her dad and then looked at Jean. Jean looked away as she took a drink. She sat it down and then looked at Sam. "Clara tell you something?" Clara glared at her. Sam shook his head. "No. Under the reek of booze, you smell like sex. Who is he?" Jean rolled her eyes. "God, he's a friend. I really like him." She glared back at Clara. Sam closed his eyes for a second. "I understand hormones. I get it really, but there are consequences. It'll be hard having kids with someone who's just a friend. You need to be sure about these kinds of things." Jean groaned. "Dad, Mom gets us birth control. We're not having kids anytime soon." He sighed a bit. "All right. Still, I need his name. Him and I are going to have a talk." Jean stabbed her toast. "No, I don't want you messing this up for me. We're just starting dating. I really like him." Sam stared at her. "You said that, and if it is anything, I couldn't mess it up. Name. Now." Jean shook her head. "No. You're not Mom, and I don't have to answer shit to you." Clara rolled her eyes and stared back down at her food. Sam calmly sat his fork down, crossing his hands over his plate with his elbows on the table, staring at her. Orbit. Orbit Sr. appeared next to him. "Hello, Sam. How are things today?" "Little stressed. You heard about the party?" Orbit laughed. "Who hasn't? It made top billing on the Clouder News Network for the last 3 hours. Your daughters are more famous than they already were." Sam leaned his forehead onto his hands. Damn it. He sighed again. "Orbit, there was a boy hanging out with Jean throughout the night. Do you have any footage of him, and are you able to get an ID?" "Brandon Connolly. He's a senior here on station and quite a proficient programmer. I've actually bought one of his scripts for my new line of miniature drones. He has a knack for octopedal movements." Sam lifted his head up and looked at Jean. "Thank you, Orbit." "No problem, Sam. Anything else you need?" Sam shook his head and the purple hologram disappeared. "Well, Brandon Connolly and I are going to be having a conversation soon, and you two are going to be working double shifts. If you aren't in school, you're at work. That's your life now." Clara looked up at her dad. I wanted to ask you something about that." Sam looked over at her. "I have a friend, new to the station. She's a refugee. She's pretty smart with machinery. Think she could have a job?" Sam nodded. "There's lots of jobs. Of course she can apply wherever she wants. I mean with you in your ship bay. Clara stammered a bit. I kind of told her how you needed some human help. Sam shook his head. Dad, you say it all the time how the Infinigans screw things up. How you need someone to just listen and follow directions. Please. She looked down for a moment. I kind of told her you would. Sam stared at her and crunched a bit of bacon. You two messed up big last night. I don't feel 1 ounce of eagerness to help you right now. Punish me all you want, but she's had a hard go. She could use the apprenticeship. It's not her fault we threw the party. Sam took another bite. What's her name? Marion, Clara said. You going to hire her? Sam crunched another bit of bacon and nodded. Sam was wiring up the primary console of the Breachcraft when he noticed a pair of sandaled feet near his tool tray. Hello? Hi, Mr. Clemens. Clara told me you were okay with me working for you. Sam scooted out from under the console and looked up at the dark-haired girl staring down at him. You Marion? She nodded. He looked her over. Shorts, short shirt, sandals, and her hair long and down. Changing room on the other side of the bay. Have Orbit size you and print off a pair of overalls and some boots. Put your hair up, too. Don't want it hanging into rotating machinery or catching fire. He shook his head and scooted back under the console. A few minutes later, he noticed a pair of boots standing near his tool tray. He held a hand out. Ratchet and sockets. Marion sorted through the tools and handed over the requested items. Sam looked and noted it was needed. Thank you, he replied back. He torqued down the wiring slots and then reached into the bundle and pulled up the next set. There's a slate on the tray. It has a schematic pulled up. I see it. Mark off wires A47, B47, and C47. Then read me the next colorings. She crossed off the designated wires in the schematic. The 48s are going to be purple whites. Sam searched through the bundle and found the 3 wires. I need you to go back to the engine compartment and find a purple-white wire attached to the governor and tone it out. How do I tone it out? Sam sighed and scooted out from under the console. He stood up, a full head taller than her, and looked at her. Come on, I'll show you. Sam and Marion worked on the breach ship for the next 7 cycles together. The Infinigan team focused on the main carrier ship. Sam had Marion operating the crane while he was on the roof guiding in the temperature control system. He waved her to the right. Just a smidge. Smidge right, she replied. He bobbed his hand down gently and she started lowering it into the large hole. He made a fist. Stopping, she said. Let me hop in and guide it. You mind climbing up here so you can see me? She nodded and climbed up the stair ladder. She carried the crane controller with her, and she crawled onto the roof and then stood. She looked down into the hole, watching Sam as he lined up the placement ports. When are we going to put on all the siding? She asked. Sam looked up at her. No idea. I'm paying teams across Twain to figure out what the siding is even supposed to be made of. One of them primary metals? Marion asked. Sam nodded a bit. Yeah. How do you know about them? He asked. She knelt down next to the hole. My sister is interning with them. She's been working on a new alloy, some sort of biological metal. Sam laughed. Yeah, that's it. Guess it's no secret. Yeah, she says it's pretty badass. It soaks up radiation, heat, light, darkest black there is. They're having a hard time producing it, though. I think they got a centimeter of it or something. Sam stood in thought for a moment. That's familiar. No way it could be. He started walking for a moment and stopped. Why wouldn't it be? It makes sense it would be. If the fucking thing wanted us to have the material, why wouldn't it? What's up? Marion asked. Sam shook his head and looked up at her. Lower this down and we will call it a day. I need to hurry and make some calls. Marion nodded and obeyed as he ordered her to lower the equipment into place. Sam clapped the lights on in his office. The air was stale. He walked across the carpet over to his desk and moved the chair out from under it. He eased himself into the old leather and relaxed. He leaned over and started typing on the desk's data slate. Sam then initiated the call. Ashera appeared floating above his desk, her snake-like hair moving on its own. "Sam of the Twain, it has been a while. What do you require of me?" "I need the data from the Fubar beast," he said bluntly. "It's dead. Nuked per your request," she replied. "And the data? Genocodes? I need those. All destroyed per your request." Sam reached into his sweater pocket and pulled out a pack of olives and opened it up. He pulled out one and ate it. "That creature made you wealthy," he said as he pulled out another olive. "You deleted everything? Destroyed a creature immune to radiation? Heck feeds on energy, with a nuclear blast?" Ashera stared at him, eyes glowing hotter. "After your injury, you decreed it be destroyed along with any means of recreating it. I did as instructed." "You blew it up and it's gone?" he asked. "Not many living things survive a thermonuclear warhead," she replied. "I've seen the reports. Ships in the Immerwald, black, immune to any energetic weapons. Think the two are related?" "I don't know, Sam. Fly over and ask your old friend Callie if you are curious." Sam laughed. "My old friend? You and Callie got close from what I recall. Didn't you have a trade deal going for several years? You were buying ore from her system, weren't you?" "I don't recall." "Okay, enough of the bullshit, Ashera. I'm not mad, and I don't want any trouble. You're an asset to the Clouder, you know this, I know this. I admit I got pissy. The divorce was rough on me and I took it out on that monster, indestructible as it is. I just need to know if it's alive somewhere. Does Callie have it?" Ashera looked at him for a moment. Why the sudden interest in something that happened years ago? "I'm going to see the Arlong soon, and that thing's skin is the key to the sheath sphere." Ashera stared even longer at him. She shut her eyes for a moment and reopened them. They were dimmer. "Yes, it did survive, barely. I couldn't put it down, you're right. I loved that thing. I transported it to the Immerwald, and Callie does have it. It is probably why her ships are exhibiting similar characteristics." Sam ate another olive and thought for a moment. "You still talk to her?" Ashera shook her head. "I'm not going to barter for you, Sam. She doesn't like you, and I don't want to be tied to that. Her and I have a good working relationship. Mend your own wounds." She then ended the call. Sam shut his eyes and chewed on an olive. Shit. He swiveled the chair and got up. "Orbit, you there?" Orbit the Younger appeared in his boyish form. "Yes, sir." "Oh, hey. You know you don't have to say sir." Orbit smiled. "I like to, sir. Do you need something?" "Yes," Sam said. "Have the team ready the Garavant. Send a missive to Rockborn, see if he'd like to ride with me. Also hit up Asterion, maybe the Preserver too. Oh, call up Pouchcheek. Have her bring 3 troops." "Where's the mission to?" Orbit asked. "Schwarzstern, I'm going to see my son."